Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good morning. It's 3 minutes past 11 on LBC. I'm delighted to say this is my first programme since March that we will be streaming live on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook. It's almost as if we're going back to normal, but not quite. Now, what we're going to be doing in this hour is talking to the two contenders for the Liberal Democrat leadership, Ed Davey and Layla Moran. They're both with me in the studio. Very lovely to see you both. Now, I've done interviews with both of you individually, but I thought, given that the Liberal Democrats have a membership of 120,000, not all of them will be able to go to hustings to listen to you. So I thought we'd have you both in the studio and try and... What I really want to try and do in this hour is not just me talk to you. I want you to talk to each other, but I am banning the phrase.
It's so nice to see you. Yeah. We keep saying it, whenever we've had 3D opportunities to see each other, it's such a lovely thing to be able to do.
Zoom hustings, they're very different.
So enough of the love-in, because I'm banning the phrase, I agree with Ed or I agree with Layla in this
I think she's
hour.
made a good point.
Because I think
He's right.
The thing is that the electorate in this election, it is just Liberal Democrat members. So obviously you are talking primarily to them. But I think our listeners want to hear what different approaches you both would have to the job. And clearly you have different approaches, otherwise you wouldn't be standing against each other. So I'm not looking for rows, but I am looking for a little bit of discussion, shall we say. I want to start off with this because both of you, I know, are avid tweeters. And you know that the last time that either of you were on, the comments that came from people on Twitter, and okay, they're not representative of the entire population, but comments this morning like this from Roger Williams. The last thing I need on a Sunday morning is listening to Layla Moran talking about human relationships or sexuality or politics. She's far too wacky for my liking. Julie says, why on earth are you talking about a party which is irrelevant to British politics with one candidate who is a failed cabinet minister and fully backed the mad revoke policy? Alfred, never have two potential party leaders chosen to be so out of touch with their electorate as this pair of complete chumps. So I thought I'd give you some nice tweets to start off with.
Yeah, well, can you send our love back to them?
Just explain. I want each of you to give me a couple of reasons why anybody should want to listen to you for the next hour. Ed.
Liberal Democrats have got the best record on tackling climate change. If you want a party that's talked about the environment, talked about the climate change and done things at local government level, at national level and international level, we have the best record of any political party. And given climate change is going to be a massive issue, you know, you want Liberal Democrats there in numbers to champion the green economy and the green society.
But why you? Why not Layla?
Well, I've actually done it in government. My record as a cabinet minister, you referred to one of your tweets, was that I nearly quadrupled renewable power. I had to fight people like George Osborne and Eric Pickles, and I won. And I went and negotiated the EU United Nations, and we got really good climate change targets. So if people are interested in climate change and think it's important, and I really, really do, and I think Liberal Democrat members do, then I think both the party is the right party to be with, and I think I've got the experience as well as the vision to deliver on that agenda for the party.
What's your answer, Layla?
What I'm hearing from those tweets is people are quite rightly questioning what we are for as a party. And I think there's a general feeling that certainly for the last few years, we haven't been listening enough to voters. So what I would say back to them is actually I take that challenge. And we have to start by recognising that we haven't been getting it right. In fact, it's been 10 years now of decline in various ways, halving of our council base. We're now at 6% in the polls. And we need to change. And that change is what I represent in this contest. It's listening to voters again, that bottom-up approach that the Lib Dems take, starting from scratch. That is where we are as a party. And the reason why it's important is because actually if you look across at Labour and the Conservatives, we have to put across a distinct identity for the party. And that's one that's liberal. It's not left, it's not right. It's about freedom to the individual. It's about investing in communities, recognising that business is a really important part of that, recognising that actually we to an extent have lost our way and we need to find our way back.
It's all very well saying the word change. That's what every usurper candidate always says in an election. Because, I mean, elections are about sort of stick with nurse for fear of worse, or I'm the change candidate. Now, clearly, you are the change candidate here. Maybe Ed would dispute that. We'll come back to him in a second. I'll come back to you in a second. But you can't just mouth the word change. You actually have to say what that means.
So what I want to see from us is going back actually to the bread and butter issues that matter to people. And that caller was saying, I don't want to talk about her sexuality or whatever. Actually, I agree. And often I don't bring it up. It's other people who ask me about it. And I don't bring it up. And the reason why I don't is because most people just frankly don't care. What they care about is what's going to be happening now in this coronavirus crisis. What's going to happen to their jobs? What's going to happen to our NHS? What's going to happen to our schools? The three pillars of my campaign that I've built around are education, the environment and the economy. And I crafted those by talking to voters first and foremost in parts of the country that actually don't have Lib Dem MPs. And the question I was asking them is, what really matters to you and what would entice you to start looking at us again, to vote Lib Dem again? And that's where we have to start, is with the voters, understanding their concerns.
Okay. Ed, you regard yourself as the change candidate, even though you were deputy leader under Joe. You're acting leader now. How can you be the change candidate?
Because as acting leader, I co-commissioned the general election review. And the general election review didn't pull any punches. It talked about a massive need for change, and that's what I wanted it to do. Because I thought for some time the party's approach to campaigning needed to change. It needed to be much more bottom-up, much more focused on our local government base, which is actually where we grew in the past. Because if you win local elections, you get credible and you can win constituencies, as well as taking power in local councils and exercising liberal values in communities up and down the country. So for me, it's campaigning changes that are going to be fundamental to winning again. And if you look at our poll ratings, we've always improved when we started winning elections. When we lose elections, our polls go down, surprisingly enough. When we win elections, they go up. So let's campaign and let's have the changes. And finally, linked to that is a clarity of message. What has frustrated me for so long is, and this did it over the Brexit campaign actually, we didn't reach out to voters who might disagree with us on Brexit, but would agree with us on many, many other things. So my message in this campaign is a greener economy, a fairer society, a more caring country. Because if you unpack that, it links back to what voters are concerned about. It gives us a distinct message, and it's a sort of message that if we bang on about with real message discipline, people will start knowing what we stand for, what our role in British politics is.
You were a senior member of Vince Cable's front bench team. You were deputy leader under Joe Swinson. You've been acting leader. I mean, the fact that you were deputy leader, doesn't that show that you didn't actually have an awful lot of influence? Because I mean, the election campaign was a disaster. I think you can probably both agree on that.
I think we do. I agree with you, Layla. You agree with me?
You were deputy leader then, and you have to take your share of responsibility for that.
Of course we all do. We only had 12 MPs. Layla and I were both one of those 12 MPs. We both sat round the table during the discussions. The parliamentary party...
But she was a new MP. You were a senior member of the front bench.
Well, indeed. I'm not trying to take responsibility from myself. And one of the reasons I set up the general election review in the way I did was because I could see the mistakes that had been made, both under Joe and Vince, and indeed before.
But what did you do to try and stop those mistakes being made?
Of course, I mean, I'm a loyal supporter of Joe. I contested this time last year. We had a very, very friendly leadership election. And then when I lost, I loyally supported her. I had private conversations with her, of course I did. And I didn't always agree with her judgments. But I'm not going to go and criticise her now. She had a tough job. She was only leader for 4 months before that leadership election. It was a difficult decision.
That is one difference between you, because you have been publicly critical of Joe Swinson, haven't you, Layla?
I've been... Actually, the review itself was critical of the approach, not of her as a person.
Yes,
and actually,
right.
to be fair, I concur with Ed's assessment that the 4 months that she was there was not long enough to be able to fully put a team around you. Not everything was done right, but it's not a personal criticism of Joe at all. However, the review itself points out that it was a very high-risk strategy. And I think where we did go wrong was when we introduced Revoke, and I've on this show said I defended it because it's logically pure. It's the logical conclusion to stop Brexit. How do you stop Brexit? Well, it's a process. You then revoke Article 50. When the Brexit
But it was
Party,
neither Liberal nor Democratic, was
well,
it? That
actually,
was the problem.
and this is the thing. And I was struck, Iain, as you walk into the LBC studios, there's a big Instagram-style thing on the wall that says people may not remember what you did, people may not remember what you said, but they'll remember how you made them feel. And the problem with the revoke policy, and this is the approach that I think we need to now take as a party, is recognise the way that it made people feel was anti-democratic. And we talk a lot about our democracy, we have Democrat in our name, we talk about bottom-up, and yet this policy made people feel that we were top-down, that we were imposing something on them. And that disconnect between what we said we wanted people to feel about us and how people actually felt about us was the problem. And that's what I'm critical of.
Whichever of you wins, would you serve in each other's front bench team?
Without a doubt.
Of course.
Well, there's no of course about it because...
Of course.
Well, I mean, I agree with Layla. There are things
You are
that
naughty.
we share in common. Lots we share in common.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to think of a penalty for
Swear
because I did
box.
try-
£5 to a charity.
I did try and ban it. Actually, that's £100 to a charity. That should mean that we don't hear it again during the course of this hour. Now, in the next section of the programme, you're going to ask each other questions, and then after 11:30, it's going to be over to the listeners. So the number to call if you want to put your question to Layla Moran or Ed Davey or both, 0345 6060 973. And actually, let's try and make it a question to both, because this is not an opportunity to have a go at one candidate or another. So let's try and put questions that apply to both. 17 minutes past 11. We have Layla Moran and Ed Davey with us in the studio. They are going to ask each other questions now for 6 or 7 minutes each. Ed, would you like to start?
I've had the invitation of Layla to start. So, Layla, we're both supporters of UBI.
Yes.
A universal basic income, and we're reforming the welfare state. I've set out in this campaign how we might pay for it. I've talked about creating a sovereign wealth fund, using the debt that has been given during COVID-19 to businesses who many of them won't be able to repay it. And rather than getting them bankrupt or them not growing, I suggest that we take shares in those companies as a government, as a public, and then the shares then yield dividends. Mm-hmm. What would be? I know obviously the party members make the final policy, but what would your pitch be about how we would pay for a UBI?
So there's two approaches to introducing a UBI, and one is your way, which is frankly a bit more slower burn, is my understanding of it, because it would take a time to set up the fund. It would be several years before the dividends would then pay in. And so that would leave the government with either a gap, or they'd have to introduce something else first and then move to this. And what I've been talking about is the other approach, which is a slightly faster approach. It's a smaller amount that people would get up front. It's Compass, actually, that have done the numbers on this. And individuals would get somewhere between 40 and 60, well, it's £60 if you're a working adult, it's much more if you're a pensioner. And then there would be money for children as well.
And how would Compass say they pay for it?
So it would in total cost £28 billion. The point they make, which I think is an interesting one, is that is roughly the same amount of money that was taken out of social welfare since 2010, so through austerity and through that period. But I don't think that it should all just be government spending. There's a huge amount of government spending. So I think also we need to be raising taxes in various forms to
What
pay
forms?
for it. Well, corporation tax itself raises something between, I think it's roughly £2.5 billion per percentage that you add on it. We've spoken about in the past, actually, party policy is to raise it back up to 20%, and that would cover some of it. If you
28
took
billion
out,
would need 10 points or something, more than 10 points.
it's not just that. It would be a range of things. There's about 1,100 different tax loopholes that higher rate taxpayers benefit from. We would
Fair
also be looking at...
I'm happy with that answer.
Yeah, if you're happy with that. So I think we would have to sort out the detail.
I'm not happy with that answer at all, because if I was a Liberal Democrat listening to this, I'd be thinking, she's mad. I'd be thinking, how on earth can you propose a whole range of tax rises when in recent history there is no record of any party gaining seats by proposing or at least winning an election by proposing wide-scale tax rises?
What we start with, and what we'll both have to do, is to make the case for UBI in the first place. And the reason why I personally think introducing this now is the right thing to do. And I've said before, I was actually not totally on board a universal basic income before coronavirus. And it's the inability of universal credit to deal with the huge fluxes that people are going through right now. The fact that we've got massive increase in food banks, people not being able to pay their bills. This would be an amount of money that everyone would get that would mean that you could put food on the table and pay your basic bills.
How much? 12,000 a year?
No. So £40 a week for an adult. It's basic food, it's basic bills. And then by introducing a more progressive taxation system, which is party policy, we are a tax and spend party. That has always been the Liberal approach, is that those who have the smallest shoulders pay the least, and those who have the broader shoulders pay the most. It's a way of introducing a more progressive taxation
Just a reminder that you can watch us on YouTube, Twitter or Facebook. Ed, continue with your rigorous questioning, please.
Oh, sorry, my second question.
You've got more.
Okay. At the beginning of this campaign, you published a pamphlet called Build Back Better.
Yep.
Lots of policy ideas, some of which I agree with, some of which I didn't. You said in the beginning that there were some that you didn't agree with as well. Could you tell me what one of the policies that you most agree with?
Yep.
And one of the policies you most disagree with?
So, why
would you publish a pamphlet that you disagreed with?
Well, so let me firstly explain how this came about.
I'm asking the question.
This is uniquely Liberal Democrat, I think.
Yeah, so what I did, and actually, so this came about after the leadership election was delayed for a year and coronavirus was happening. And what I wanted to do was, I could see that in the party there was a sort of general sense of frustration that our party conference had been cancelled and then moved. And actually, how are we going to get the great ideas from this party? The party's at its best when it's fizzing with ideas. And Paddy Ashdown used to say that about the party. And I do think we need to get back to that.
And so I agree with that. I've set up something called Policy Lab for all members. It's going to be across the whole party.
So you get to pay £100 now.
So we're agreeing on the fizzing idea. But what about my question, Layla?
No, but let me explain. So there were about 40 different contributors. And what I said in the introduction was, when I set this up, I didn't want to stifle debate. I didn't want to be the censor. I didn't want to be the gatekeeper. What I wanted to be was the person who invited these ideas. So the one that I agree with the most, there's actually huge amounts in there. I think one of there was a brilliant chapter by David Howarth that talked about how we can do the economy differently now. And it talks to the works of Kate Raworth, donut economics. And what this means, essentially, is you treat the planet as a finite resource, when so far humanity has treated it as an infinite resource. And the knock-on implication of that is that you end up making policy that's not just there to drive growth. It also puts well-being at its heart. It also puts the green economy at its heart. It also treats humans as infrastructure. So rather than just investing in houses and roads, you're also investing in people's education. Okay. And it's a much more holistic approach.
That's one I agree with the most.
And what about
the one that I agree with the least, there's a really quite pithy chapter by a wonderful gentleman called Paul Noblet, which talks about, it's phrased as kind of, the state should be fully responsible for ensuring things like broadband is available to everybody. And this was the one that got picked up by people. And I remember reading it going, "Oh, Paul, I'm not sure about if I agree with this." But I made sure it was in there because it sparked a debate, and one that I think is quite an important debate, because in rural areas, there is a real issue with the delivery of broadband. My own view is that the state should be part of the actor and bringing people together to make sure it's there. But if the market fails, that it's right that the state does something about it.
Somebody's just tweeted, "What a dirty trick by a Davey. He just asked Layla Moran how she was planning to pay for UBI. Outrageous." Layla, your questions to Ed, please.
Wasn't it?
I know. So this is about the party and the changes that we need to make. So the Older Dice and the General Election Review itself said that our party needs to fundamentally change, and that do you agree with that? And do you agree that we need to change and that more of the same and what we've been doing isn't good enough?
Totally. I mean, one of the reasons why I co-commissioned the general election review in the way I did was because I wanted more change than I think the party machinery wanted. When it was proposed to me, the original remit, they only wanted to look at the 2019 elections. They wanted to spend half of the review looking at the European elections of 2019. And I said, that's not going to teach us anything. And so I changed the remit. And I made sure the remit asked some much more searching questions about what our party had been doing, and particularly looked back over a number of elections, because I think we've been going wrong for some time at our governance level, the way we've campaigned. So I specifically wanted the general elections review to be a much deeper dive, because I think we needed a more profound change. And so that's what it's actually
just
produced.
on that. Alex Cantor, who's a Lib Dem councillor, has tweeted, dishonesty alert, Ed Davey did not set up the post-election
No, I said
review.
co-commissioned.
The federal board always does it post-elections.
It does. I co-commissioned it.
I'm not sure you said co-commissioned.
No, you said earlier.
Well, I've been saying co-commissioning throughout this campaign.
But earlier,
and Alex Cantor is absolutely right. The federal board have that responsibility. Actually, to be precise, there's an audit committee beneath that has the responsibility. And my role in it was to work with Mark Pack and the chair of that particular committee to decide the remit, which I did. And I put the remit to the federal board, and I also proposed Dorothy Thornhill as the chair. That's just a fact.
Okay.
Yeah, but earlier this hour you said I set it up. You said that earlier.
Let me correct myself. I'm happy to
be clear.
I'm happy to correct the record, because I've been saying it on many hustings as you've been there, because you've heard me say it. I co-commissioned it.
Another question.
Right. So how are we going to win in Labour-facing seats, particularly with the young?
Well, as you and I have both agreed that we wouldn't do a deal with the Conservatives, and we've got most of our gains are going to be against the Conservatives. And I think actually we can use that when we're contesting Labour. We can show that we're an anti-Conservative party. And many Labour supporters in the areas that we want to fight will want to know that we're an anti-Conservative party. So the fact that both you and I, we agree on this, Iain, are clear. Is that £200? Are really clear. That actually will set us up.
He's got more donations than you, Layla.
That's right.
So don't worry.
That will set us up for those seats. And I'm really clear, though, in our strategy that we need to be very robust in those Labour areas where you've got incompetent Labour MPs, ineffective Labour MPs, poor Labour councillors. We are often the only opposition the public have. We should be really robust in those seats. And, I've over many years, I've gone and campaigned with Liberal Democrat councillors and PPCs to campaign against Labour. There's no way that should stop. We should be really critical. We're an independent party. I've been worried about some of ideas which have been attributed to you, and I'm not going to say them, about a joint campaigning force and things like that. I think we've got to be very, very independent. And as leader, I want to establish ourselves in our own right to take on both the Conservatives and the Labour Party. That would not stop us having understandings in seats where we are the main challengers to the Tories, and in seats where the Labour Party are clearly the only people who can beat the Conservatives.
So if we had Labour Party activists and Green activists campaigning with us in seats against the Tories, would you be against that?
I'd be very worried about it. Because
that's how I won Oxford, West and Abingdon. So it works.
You may have done, but actually we'd won Oxford and West Abingdon before, and we hadn't done that. So you could win Oxford, West and Abingdon without that. When Evan Harris won it, he didn't have that joint campaigning force. And the reality is a joint campaigning force would have to be reciprocated. So you'll basically be asking Liberal Democrats to go and deliver Labour leaflets in other areas. And I think party members might find that a bit troubling.
You said you're anti-Conservative. Would you both describe yourselves as anti-Labour?
In areas where we need to hold Labour to account, yes. I'm not in the Labour Party. I'm a Liberal Democrat. I'm very proud of liberal principles of freedom, liberal principles of devolving power to people, of radical reform, whether it's on the green agenda or the social justice agenda. I joined the Liberal Democrats when they were 4% in the opinion polls back in 1989. It wasn't a career move, Iain.
It's a masochistic move, that's what it was.
And I've been working this party for 30 years. I fundamentally believe in our values. I want us to be an independent, strong liberal force.
We take it as read that you're both Liberal Democrats.
Fundamentally, I'm not anti anybody, and there are very many people who are Conservative voters and activists and whatever else who actually I have huge respect for. But the party as a whole, the Conservative Party, where it is now and where it's positioning itself, and Boris Johnson and his inability to deal with the crisis in front of us in a way that's coherent, actually, and also their stance over Brexit, and also some of the social views of a lot of their membership, I dare say, at the moment, is very, very far away from the Britain that I want. And so when I say that I've ruled out any kind of future coalition with the Tories, that's why. With Labour, I think there is more that there is in common. I mean, it's interesting
but you haven't actually, have you? I thought you just ruled out a coalition with Boris Johnson.
No. It's Boris Johnson. I'm assuming, my assumption has been that Boris Johnson, we know this about Boris Johnson, he's one of politics' great survivors. And there are those who are suggesting that he might go before the next election. I mean, I'll ask you, Iain, do you think that's likely? Because I don't.
I'm not here to answer your questions,
no,
Layla.
But I don't. So some people pointed out, does that leave it open for us to do a deal with the Conservatives?
I did hear a theory over the weekend,
and the answer to that is no.
There is a theory that, but I won't go into it because we haven't got enough time.
Okay, shame.
Anyway, we are going to come to your questions in a moment. 0345 6060 if you'd like to ask Layla Moran or Ed Davey a question on LBC. It's 11:31. 11:34. Anthony Hook is a happy person. I don't know if he's a Lib Dem or not.
He's on my team, to be fair. Yeah.
Well,
he's not impartial. I'm not going to...
Well, he says, really enjoying listening to the Lib Dem hustings on LBC. Iain is chairing in a very fair and pleasant way. Well, I don't think we need to have any aggro, do we? But we might in the next half an hour. Who knows? Let's go to your calls. Layla Moran, Ed Davey with me. You can watch on YouTube, Twitter and Facebook if you wish to. Cornelius is in Swansea. Hi, Cornelius.
Iain, how are you this morning?
Hi, not too bad, thank you. What would you like to say?
Well, first of all, the last time I had an opportunity to speak in his show, Layla Moran was on there.
I remember, Cornelius. Nice to speak to you again.
Yeah, I had 650,000 hits when I asked you why do you apply for a job with the EU, and yet it appears you haven't taken my advice.
No, I'm applying for another job now, actually. That's partly why we're here, which is leader of the Liberal Democrats.
The only thing.
So what's your question, Cornelius? I want to get to questions quite quickly if we can.
Yeah, okay. How can the public trust either of you when you try to do everything you possibly could to stop the biggest vote in British history?
Layla.
Thanks, Cornelius. So one of the things that I've been talking about in this election is that we do need to win back trust. And Cornelius, I've no idea how you've voted in the past. And I'd love to understand if you'd ever considered voting Liberal Democrat. But I've spoken to a number of Liberal Democrats, particularly in Brexit voting areas of this country, who felt that we actually, at this point, totally bought into the divisive nature of politics, that they didn't feel that they could vote for us, even though they agreed with us on so much, on our focus on communities, our focus on public services, our focus on an economy where everyone feels that they're able to get their full part in it. And I do think that we need to win back your trust, Cornelius. And it starts with listening to people like you about where do we go from here as a country. And coronavirus does provide us with an opportunity to have those discussions now, because we know, we can see in front of us these huge inequalities that we have. How are we going to tackle them? How are we going to make sure that we've got an NHS that's properly funded, that children are able to learn? We're huge debate today about schools reopening in September or not in the wake of what's going on. This is a time for us to build back trust with you and others,
okay.
Cornelius.
I'm going to ask you both to keep your answers relatively short in this section so we can get as many callers on as possible, and also ask the callers to be quite short in the questions. Ed.
Cornelius, our real core policy of the last election was to give the voters another vote, a second referendum. That's what we argued for, that's what we pushed for, and I don't think that undermines democracy. Moreover, I've always argued, and I was arguing in the election last time, that we needed to reach out to Leave voters and reach out to Leave communities, because we're not just a one-trick pony, right?
You were at the last election.
Well, and we shouldn't have been. And
you were deputy leader.
We did have a lot of other policies, we just didn't get them across, unfortunately. And what I'm saying in this leadership election is I want us to be the advocates for a greener economy, a fairer society, and a more caring country. I think the more caring country, Cornelius, is something that COVID shows in spades. You know, the Prime Minister said protect the NHS, we all agree with that, and he ignored the care homes. and look at the tragedy, look at the appalling things that have happened with the deaths in our care homes. It's one of the reasons why I was determined to make the case for an inquiry into the government's shambolic handling of the COVID pandemic. And I won a commitment, the first he ever gave from the Prime Minister through my Prime Minister's question, that he has now committed this government to an independent inquiry. Now, I think it needs to happen immediately. I think we need to get on with it, and it needs to be rigorously enforced. And Cornelius, I think that's the sort of approach that if the Liberal Democrats adopt, show we're on your side, working for you, trying to hold the government to account, then we can win back your trust.
I love the way you turn a Brexit question into an achievement in Parliament. well done for that.
Thank you.
Right, Cornelius, thank you for that. Let's go to Victoria in Inverness. Victoria, what's your question, please?
Good morning. My question is for both of you, and I was hoping, could you please define the word woman, and could you explain if the £100,000 that were donated to your party by a pharmaceutical company that produces puberty blockers influences said definition?
Ed.
Well, the last question I didn't even know about.
No,
it.
neither.
So it's had no influence on me whatsoever, Victoria.
True.
And a woman is defined by the individual. If the person believes that they are a woman, a trans woman is a woman. That's my view. It's the party's view, and it's the view of many other people. I know it's controversial for people, and I know we have to have a discussion with people, just like we do on any other political issue. But the party's position is clear. I completely support the party's position because we're a party who believes in individuals being able to be themselves. We believe in equality of respect. And when you have that as a core of your philosophy, then you have to respect trans rights.
This wasn't a question about trans rights. This was a question about defining what a woman is.
Well, I think that was behind it, Iain, as you know.
Layla?
It's a gender, as is male, as is...
Nothing to do with biology?
So the female male is a biological term. It's partly determined by genetics. Genetics are not always that clear either.
Isn't it determined by chromosomes?
But we've also got, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, Iain, because we've done this before, where we talk about XY and XXY and the fact that there's intersex is another...
behind the question, isn't
There's
it?
another thing as well. So humanity is complex. Humanity is diverse. It's beautiful in its diversity. The liberal approach to this is that every individual has the right to be respected for who they are. It's not for society to do that. It's for the individual to do that. And where you have these issues of people who are trying to just be happy, that's what's happening here. We've got people who feel that they were born in the wrong body. They are then changing that body to better reflect who they are inside. The person inside is what I'm most interested in.
Okay. CNN tweeted earlier this week, individuals with a cervix are now recommended to start cervical cancer screening at 25. Now, the message behind that is obviously one that everyone can buy into. Individuals with a cervix, there's a word for that, isn't there? And it's woman.
Indeed. And I think the reason why they've done that is because they want to be inclusive of trans women.
But are we
they
getting
should just
to the
maybe
point,
just say women.
both of you, where the word woman is going to be, or man, is going to be something that we can't really...
Well, let me... We had this same argument when Liberal Democrats were pushing through and arguing for same-sex marriage legislation. I had people coming to my surgery and saying, you're taking the meaning out of marriage. Marriage has always been between a man and a woman. And I said, no, I'm sorry. Marriage is about what our society feels it with the values we have at the moment. And so I pushed back against all those people who didn't want me to vote for same-sex marriage, and we championed it. I'm very proud. Lynn Featherstone, the coalition government. Yeah, but it was a huge achievement. But my point is this, that words do have a context, and they have a context, and they sometimes change when people understand how individuals are behaving and how they want to behave. And I think people have to get real and understand that's the context for this debate.
Victoria, what's your response to what you've heard?
I mean, it's really frustrating because there's a false amalgamation of the concept of standing up for women's rights equals transphobic or wanting to take something away. And I was really fascinated by what Layla said about changing their bodies, because actually the gender recognition certificate, no one's arguing about that. What we're arguing is self-ID, which doesn't necessitate changing anyone's body to go with whatever they feel. So it's
the beginning of the process. That's the beginning of a process, Victoria. And
it's the beginning of a process of changing your body, but that's not what self-ID says. Self-ID says you can wake up and say,
no, it doesn't.
I now feel this way, and without changing anything about yourself.
Victoria, what you're saying there is factually incorrect. That is not
the definition of self. What
that is not what the
for,
legislation would have done, and it's a real shame.
Anyone who lives as or proposes to live as. I'm familiar with what the legislation says.
Yeah, and so waking up the way you've just described it, Victoria, the way you've just described it has underplayed what is often a very painful personal process for someone in that position. It's not that flippant comment of I'm just going to wake up the next morning as if I'm going to wake up tomorrow morning and I'm going to go get a Starbucks. That is not what this is. This is a much deeper issue.
That this issue became so divisive in the Labour leadership contest. It's kind of becoming divisive in this.
No, it's not.
No, it's not at all.
Well, I agree with Layla.
I agree with Ed.
You can agree with each other. You can agree with your party
and the
on
party
it.
agrees.
But when you have people texting in saying the woman issue is the reason I left the Lib Dems, I'm a woman, not a cis woman or a person with a cervix, and there's plenty of those coming in as well. And these are not people who are being transphobic. They are people who believe that they're...
But Ian, the way you deal with this, you have a debate. You have an open debate.
The Liberal Democrats have always been a party that is very often at the forefront of progressive change. And societies evolve. Our understanding of each other as humans evolves. And I don't think, when I was very young, I even knew what a trans person was. I didn't realise that happened. And that's one of the reasons why, in my role as education spokesperson, I've been pushing for relationship and sex education so that as we grow and as we understand each other, just because there's a minority, someone you might not even have realised you met, or even someone you've never encountered in school.
I want to agree with you. I'm sorry. The reality is...
I've failed in this.
You have totally failed. The reality is that trans people are some of the most discriminated against in our society.
I agree with that.
And all we're saying is giving trans women and trans men rights, giving them rights and protecting them doesn't undermine the rights of others.
That's the point. I mean, this question, I think, was clearly more directed at Layla. Why are women...
Well, why not at me?
Well, I think it just was. Why are women...
Well, I think that's wrong. I had to answer
That's my question to you. Why are women expected to answer this kind of question in a way that men aren't? It was the same in the Labour leadership. I mean, Keir Starmer never got this. It was all the women.
I know, it's unfair. It's wrong. This is not an issue that's just gender related to women. It's related to all of us. We all have to take a responsibility here. We all have to engage in this debate because let us be clear. This is a controversial issue in different political parties, in the wider public. People aren't as au fait with the arguments on either side. So what I hope we can do is have a mature and grown-up debate on it.
Yeah, the problem is...
it often
Mike
gets very...
is saying here, I'm a Lib Dem. You'd be surprised how many in the party don't agree with this policy, but we're shut down.
I don't shut down, I hope, doesn't happen. And one thing I will say, and let's just take a step back, and you mentioned this, Ian, about the divisive nature of this debate. The divisive nature of this debate, the way, frankly, it has become a bit politicised, the way it's setting one group of people against someone else, that Victoria's comment about fighting for women's rights being somehow at odds with talking about this, that is the opposite of what I want to see from this debate. And I do think we need to try and take the temperature out of it.
Just to redress the balance, Jazza on Twitter says, I'm very proud to be a member of the Lib Dems today, hearing both Ed and Layla unequivocally defend trans women and their rights on LBC.
Trans men.
Okay.
And trans men, indeed.
This is a minefield, isn't it? It's 11:47. 10 to 12 on LBC. Let's go to Chris in Hertford. Hello, Chris.
Oh, good morning, all. Thank you for taking my call. So as somebody who really should be a Liberal Democrat voter and potentially was a Liberal Democrat voter, I've now gone over to the Conservative Party. And I know, Layla, you spoke about ruling out a coalition or a deal with the Tories, which is absolutely fine. But you didn't rule out doing it with the Labour Party. Now, my fear is that obviously I want to encourage and help the Liberal Democrats and potentially go back to supporting them because, you know, I consider myself a Liberal. But the idea of having a Labour government does somewhat horrify me, and I don't want to vote for a party if it just means there's the possibility of them becoming Labour's lapdog. So how do you expect to, mate, it's both of you, how do you expect to win over someone like myself who is a Liberal but has gone over to the Conservative Party?
Thank you, Chris. Well, you're exactly the kind of person that we should be winning over. And it's about showing you in your own area, but also across the country, how we are different to both of them. And there are key differences between us and Labour. I mean, first and foremost is the approach to the kind of society that we want to create. And whilst, we all recognise that there's huge inequalities, poverty, these are the kinds of things we want to tackle. Bottom-up approach, an approach that really puts you at the heart of everything, not the government at the heart of everything, devolving power away from Westminster, abolishing the House of Lords, these other kinds of policies that are really very
distinctive. They talk about nothing else down the dog and duck in Hertford.
Exactly right. Anyway, we have to put across a distinct agenda, and every single Lib Dem MP, every vote that you put in a Lib Dem box is for that distinct approach.
But his point is that at the beginning of this campaign, you were pitching yourself as the Lib Dem left-wing alternative to Keir Starmer. And yet, as Ed said earlier in the debate, it's actually Conservative votes that you need to win back to win seats against Conservatives. There's a dilemma there for you, surely.
My pitch was about radical liberalism. And I found it really interesting how in this debate, me saying that I wanted to be more radical than Keir Starmer has been interpreted as left when I meant liberalism. And I'm happy to keep clarifying that, because that distinct liberal approach is how we're going to keep winning people like Chris over.
What I'd say to Chris in Hertfordshire is this. Liberal Democrats are a pro-business party. We have argued for investment and jobs. I've got a green economic plan. And if you look at the Conservatives, they've been letting down business. First of all, I would argue with Brexit. I know it's controversial, but I think they are. I think if you look at the shambolic handling of COVID, that has undermined uncertainty. Rishi Sunak may have done some good stuff, but the overall handling has created the uncertainty and the damage to our economy. I think the red tape they're now proposing in trade is very anti-business. So I'd say to Chris, I'm an economist, got a degree in economics, put myself through night school for my postgrad, and the plans that I want to put for the party to position ourselves as pro-business, I think would appeal to people like Chris. And, we will never be an adjunct to any political party. I'm determined we are strong and independent, and in a negotiation that may or may not happen with any other party, we will be fighting on the Liberal Democrat agenda.
OK, well, there's an allied question to this. Chris, thank you for that, from Simon in Southampton. Go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, hi. So I'm kind of coming at this from the other end, really. So I believe that with Corbyn in charge of Labour, the Liberal Democrats became kind of a home to the moderates from the Labour Party, such as myself. It's one of the reasons I joined the party myself. Now with Sir Keir in charge, and he's bringing the Labour Party back towards centre ground, winning background from the Conservatives, what will you do to prevent an exodus of voters and members like myself back towards the Labour Party?
Well, one of the reasons I'm talking this election about social justice and a fairer society is because I think the party has not talked about those social justice issues anywhere near enough. In the preamble to our constitution, we talk about tackling poverty, dealing with inequality. I think people from the moderate left will feel very comfortable in our party. And to be honest, Simon, I'm very pleased that Starmer's there. It's good for British politics that the Labour Party is moving from the extreme left to the centre left, and I really, really welcome that. But I'd urge you to stay in our party to make sure that you can contribute, whether it's through the Social Liberal Forum or others, to make sure that we are making those messages really clear. And my only query about Starmer and the Labour Party at the moment is he fully in charge of the Labour Party? Because momentum haven't gone away. Those Corbynista MPs that have been elected under Jeremy Corbyn haven't gone away yet. So let's not be too naive about the Starmer Labour Party. Let's not be starry-eyed just because he looks a bit better than Corbyn. That's not a very difficult test, is it? Let us build up our party as a radical party that is campaigning for social housing, council housing, and campaigning for investment in public services. And then I think we can both keep you in our party, Simon, but also attract those centre-left voters in the seats where we're the only people who can beat the Conservatives.
Layla.
So, Simon, welcome to the party, and I hope in this leadership election we can convince you to stay. And right at the core of what we need to be talking about is liberalism. But as part of liberalism, the freedom of the individual to live life as they choose, to have the security to live the life that they want. We also talk about individuals being free from ignorance, poverty and conformity. So that world that we want to create, I think actually is very aligned to voters and activists and members who might be on the centre-left of politics. But there is also a big elephant in the room with Labour, which is electoral reform. And that has always been a distinct policy of our party. It also explains why, bluntly, in those Tory-facing seats that we need to win, I am pleased that Keir Starmer is less divisive than Jeremy Corbyn, because one of the big dynamics we saw at the last election was people not voting for us because they were so scared of Corbyn. So actually a slightly less scary leader of the Labour Party helps us in seats that we need to win against the Tories. But electoral reform, they still haven't fully come on board. There are people talking behind the scenes, hopeful that Labour might well go to that point, but they aren't there. Stay with us, help us make the case for why first past the post system needs to go.
Thank you, Simon. Chris is in South Croydon. Chris, what's your question, please?
Oh, good morning. Good morning, Iain. Good morning, Layla.
Good morning.
Ed.
Hi, Chris.
My question is, what size population do you think the UK can accommodate in view of your enthusiasm for unlimited immigration?
Layla.
We are a country that has always been welcoming, that has relied on people coming to our country to help make our economy work. It's happened successively over hundreds of years. And actually, I would argue there is absolutely a place for immigration. In fact, to celebrate those people who are coming to help us. Well, in terms of a specific number, I can't give that to him because I'm not sure anyone knows that number.
But we have a population of about 68 million
68
now.
million.
70, 80?
I want to see the people here, coming here, welcomed so that they can work in the NHS, work in our schools, work as our nurses, work in our care homes. And I find that Priti Patel's points-based system that is not actively encouraging those particularly working in care homes to come over, utterly atrocious. It suits nobody in this country.
Our population has grown over centuries and over recent decades. We've been able to manage that. We're not the most densely populated country in Europe. I'm sorry, Chris. I really have to push back about your question. I do agree with Layla. Immigration has been a fundamental part of our country's history. We have people who are working in our NHS and our care system. I don't know about you, Chris. I went out there and I clapped them. I thanked them. And one of the things that I find so disgusting about this government is that because they forgot the care sector and actually didn't provide the PPE, a lot of people from the black and ethnic minority communities, some of whom who are immigrant populations, they have suffered most in COVID. So I want to really be on the side of people who've come to our country to help us out.
Quick final question from Siobhan Benita. Tact is key for any party leader. Who is your favourite radio presenter?
It's always been Iain Dale, obviously.
No, that's just crawling, not tact.
Besides your good self. Oh, God, I'm trying to think of them. Because normally you think about the ones who you don't want to be interviewed
Imagine
by.
Nawaz, maybe?
Not Imagine Nawaz. God.
Well, that's not very tactful, is it?
I think... my mind's gone blank.
Okay. Well, we have to.
I think all journalists do a fantastic job, and I look forward to any interview with any.
It gets worse. Listen, thank you both of you. I think maybe I should be tactful and say maybe you should become co-leaders. Ed Davey, Layla.
I'm already a co-leader.
Thank you. You wouldn't recommend it, would you? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you,
David Lammy will be